Hello, and welcome to the Pittsburgh City Council Cablecast public hearing for Wednesday, February 19th, 2020. My name is Louise Chris, and with us today is our sign language interpreter, Alex Nagy. The public hearing will be on the following legislation. Bill 2019-2307, resolution providing for the designation as a historic structure under Title 11 of the Code of Ordinances that certain structure known as the Joseph J. Weiss Jr. Federal Courthouse located at 700 Grant Street in downtown in the 2nd Ward, City of Pittsburgh. Bill 29, resolution providing for the designation as an historic structure under Title 11 Code of Ordinances that certain structures known as the Bradbury located at 1130 Redor Street in the Central Northside neighborhood in the 22nd Ward, City of Pittsburgh. Bill 30, resolution providing for the designation as a historic structure under Title 11 of the Code of Ordinances that certain structure known as the City County Building located at 414 Grant Street in downtown in the 1st Ward, City of Pittsburgh. Bill 31, resolution providing for a designation as a historic structure under Title 11 of the Code of Ordinances that certain structures known as the Pennsylvania National Bank located at 3480 Butler Street in the Lawrenceville neighborhood in the 6th Ward, City of Pittsburgh. This concludes the reading for the Cablecast public hearing for Wednesday, February 19th, 2020. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Good afternoon and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's public hearing for Wednesday, February 19th, 2020 regarding bills 2019-2307, 2020-0029, 30, and 331. Will the clerk please read the title of the bill?
Bill 2307, resolution providing for the designation as a historic structure under Title 11 of the Code of Ordinances that certain structure known as the Joseph J. Weiss Jr. Federal Courthouse located at 700 Grant Street in downtown 2nd Ward. Bill number 29, resolution providing for the designation as a historic structure under Title 11 of the Code of Ordinances that certain structure known as the Bradbury located at 1130 Redor Street in the Central Northside neighborhood, 22nd Ward. Bill number 30, resolution providing for the designation as a historic structure under Title 11 of the Code of Ordinances that certain structure known as the City County Building, 414 Grant Street, downtown 1st Ward. Bill number 31, resolution providing for the designation as a historic structure under Title 11 of the Code of Ordinances that certain structure known as the Pennsylvania National Bank located at 3480 Butler Street in Lawrenceville neighborhood, 6th Ward.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And for the record, we are joined today by Councilmember Deb Gross, and I think other members will be joining us shortly. So our first order of business will be presentations by Sarah Quinn from the city's Planning Department, followed by testimony from any speakers that we might have present. Ms. Quinn, thank you.
I always enjoy these so much. I wanted to make sure I came and got my packets.
They're right there.
So I'm sorry. I will have to be
One envelope,
out soon.
one envelope for each building. Yeah. Yeah. Well, my name's Sarah Quinn. I'm the preservation planner for the city, and as you stated, I'm here to provide some information regarding the historic nominations. First thing I will say is that each of these nominations is supported by the property owner, so that makes things a little bit more fun for us. But the Weiss Courthouse was first nominated in July of this year, and it's a 10-story building which covers an entire city block on Grant Street between 7th Avenue and what is now Martin Luther King Jr. East Busway. The building is organized into two main volumes. a 4-story base, which occupies the full site, and a 6-story upper section, which is set back about 85 feet on the north and south sides. The entrance doors are set in flute pilasters in an ornamental surround capped by a bronze eagle and shield motif. Larger eagles also appear on top of each entrance archway, and a frieze panel just below the cornice carries the inscription, quote, "Post Office and Courts of the United States of America." Excuse me. In 1926, President Coolidge signed into law the Public Buildings Act, which will authorize funding for new federal buildings throughout the country. The following year, Pittsburgh was identified as one of the 120 cities in which new government buildings should be constructed. Specifically, Pittsburgh was chosen because of the post office. The existing 5-story building at 4th Avenue and Smithfield Street, it had taken a decade to build and was almost, as soon as it opened, almost too small. The main post office, it says, has been found to be much overcrowded, but temporary relief was afforded by the lease of a building at the Ferry Street station. In 1927, it was announced that a $3 million post office had been approved for Pittsburgh. The plan was for a 5-story structure which would house only postal facilities, with the federal courts and other departments remaining in old buildings. Pittsburgh's progress in industrial importance. Pittsburgh was hoping for a different sort of structure, one symbolic of Pittsburgh's progress and industrial importance. Victorian buildings like the old post office were out of fashion by the 1920s and did not project the modern image of the city's business leaders wanted. As a compromise, federal officials planned to give the building a reinforced foundation, which would allow for additional stories to be added in the future. Fortunately for the concerned businessman, Representative Stephen G. Porter shared the sentiments and was able to lobby the Treasury Department for a more imposing edifice. By December 1927, it was being reported that the new building would house all the city federal offices in one place, as the Chamber of Commerce had hoped: Internal Revenue Office, Immigration Services, Department of Justice, Probation, and so on. The building's design was awarded to New York architectural firm Trowbridge and Livingston. And as fate would have it, this decision was probably influenced by Treasury Secretary Andrew W. Mellon, a Pittsburgh native who had worked with the firm previously on Mellon National Bank building in 1924. With the onset of the Great Depression, Mellon and President Hoover sought to speed up government building programs in order to boost employment. The new building was the largest structure in downtown Pittsburgh, with around 600,000 square feet of floor space and room for 3,000 employees. It's interesting to note that an elaborate system of chutes and conveyors allowed mail to be moved quickly from floor to floor, and in an effort to keep mail secure, the building also had a network of tunnels allowing hidden postal inspectors to watch the employees below, even in the washrooms. In 1935, 3 20 by 10 foot murals were commissioned for the courtrooms on the 8th floor. The first two murals were painted by Carnegie Tech professor McLeary and Howard Cook from Taos, New Mexico. The third mural, the local committee selected Life and Death by 24-year-old Stuyvesant Van Veen of New York, but his depiction of justice befuddled, quote unquote, was intractable class struggle suggested as the solution was deemed too radical by government representatives. Van Veen was invited to modify the design, but instead chose to submit a new work, Pittsburgh Panorama, which depicted the city framed by the Westinghouse Memorial Bridge. This design was accepted, though unbeknownst to officials, Van Veen had still managed to get the last word by subtly shaping the Monongahela River and the steel mills on its banks to resemble a hammer and sickle. In 2015, the building was renamed in honor of Joseph Weiss Jr. He passed in 2014. He was a Pittsburgh native and a senior judge in the U.S. Third Circuit Court of Appeals. The Historic Review Commission found this property significant as an exemplification of an architectural type. It's considered to be of a neoclassical design, which peaked between 1890 and 1915. However, this building obviously was constructed later than that, but being a monumental public structure, that was actually rather common. The Historic Review Commission also felt that this building was significant in its identification as the work of an architect or designer. As I mentioned earlier, Trowbridge and Livingston were the designers of the building. They designed the Mellon National Bank building in 1924, as well as the Golf building in 1932. It says all three structures are unique in scale and style. The Mellon Bank building is neoclassical, the Golf building is Art Deco, and the courthouse represents a transition between the two buildings. Excuse me. The Historic Review Commission also felt this building was significant in its association with important cultural or social aspects of history. The courthouse is significant due to its association with Depression-era federal work relief programs enacted by Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt's New Deal programs were unprecedented in scope and impact. Thank you. I'm actually getting over laryngitis.
Good timing.
Construction of the building began in 1931 as a federal work relief project under the Hoover administration. However, he was firmly committed to keeping a balanced budget and was not willing to significantly increase government spending on new projects. Since the Pittsburgh building was already funded, however, Hoover and Andrew Mellon worked to get it started as quickly as possible. The courthouse employed more than 400 workers during its 3-year construction period, though the work halted several times by strikes and labor disputes. The building required 15,000 tons of structural steel, enough to keep its supplier, Fort Pitt Bridge Company, operating for 3 months. Although the building was not a New Deal project itself, its association with the New Deal murals created under the Treasury's Department section of paint and sculpture. The 2 murals in the courthouse, Steel Industry by Howard Cook and Pittsburgh Panorama, both artists are well known for their mural work and completed New Deal commissions in addition to the courthouse painting. 2 courthouse murals are part of a legacy of 94 artworks in Pennsylvania commissioned by the section between 1934 and 1943. Not all have survived. In fact, a 3rd mural in the U.S. courthouse is among those no longer extant. Of the Pennsylvania commissions, only one other mural is located in Pittsburgh. History of Squirrel Hill by Alan Thompson. It's installed in the Squirrel Hill post office. So, same program. And finally, the Review Commission felt that this property was significant just as a location of distinctive physical appearance, a landmark, visual landmark, so to speak, because it covers an entire city block and is at a prominent position on Grant Street. So I can tell you, if you have the packets, you can look at some of the murals. They're pretty dramatic. I don't know that we would see some of these today. But both the Historic Review Commission and the Planning Commission voted to provide a positive recommendation to City Council for
Very
this
good.
building. Yeah.
Given that we have 4 pieces of legislation for historic nominations before us today, I would like to ask you to review all of them, to present on all of them.
Okay.
One right after the other, and then we can open it up to
Sure.
any speakers, unregistered speakers. That'd be great.
Okay. No
Thank
problem.
you.
I'm going to take a drink of water, though.
Please take your time. I have no questions about this. It's fascinating to see some of the murals and what, never having actually been inside the federal courthouse myself, I always wonder, it looks fortress-like from the outside. I always wonder what it's like on the inside. So to see some of this art is fascinating. To hear the history
Yeah.
is really,
Yeah, it's
really
great.
interesting.
It's honestly, the murals, the style of the murals remind me a lot of the mural on the inside of the terrace room at the William Penn. Okay, so the next property is the Bradbury, which is a smallish apartment building located on Redour Street on the north side. That property is actually, we received this nomination because the property is part of a mitigation of some impacts from the URA on the Garden Theater block. Because this is on the same block as that. So because some buildings came down, the developer agreed to go ahead and submit this and get it listed. But it's actually a great building. We received this nomination in September of 2019. The building, as I said, is located at 1130 Redour Street in the central north side, which is like a mile north of downtown. The Bradbury is a 4-story brick apartment building constructed in the Renaissance Revival style that faces west onto Redour. Around the turn of the 20th century, this intersection of North and Federal Street became center of a commercial concentration with new businesses like those on the ground floor of the Masonic Hall, which is in close proximity. Allegheny City resident and businessman William T. Bradbury purchased the lot next to the newly constructed Masonic Hall in 1894, and within a few years hired Frederick Osterling to design the 16-flat apartment house to be fashionably located just off of Allegheny Commons Park. General plans were announced in 1901. In the Pittsburgh Press, shortly thereafter, there was a headline. It was actually pretty funny. It says, quote, "Permit for big building in Allegheny City." It indicated that the Allegheny Bureau issued a permit to William T. Bradbury, the former well-known stove manufacturer, for the erection of a 4-story brick apartment house. It'll have frontage on Ray Street, which is before Allegheny City was annexed by Pittsburgh. It was Ray Street and Ellsworth Street. It will cost $30,000. The fireproof construction of this building was a particular feature of the building that may have attracted tenants and which contributes to its significance. A September 1902 advertisement by William Bradbury's agent, A.D. Wilson, claims that the Bradbury flats are the finest and only fireproof flats in the city. The Historic Review Commission felt that this property was significant as its identification with a person who contributed to history of the city of Pittsburgh. The Bradbury apartment building is significant for its association with William T. Bradbury, who was president of the Anschutz Bradbury Company, a manufacturer of cook, parlor, and heating stove, whose plant was located on Preble Avenue along the Ohio River and south of Western State Penitentiary. Following the death of his wife in 1910, Bradbury lived in one of the apartments in the building and died in his home in 1924 at the age of 85. He was born in Finleyville, Washington County, Pennsylvania in 1839. He married and moved to Allegheny City. Bradbury was educated in Allegheny public schools before becoming an apprentice iron molder when he was 17. He worked there until 1862 when he enlisted in Company G of the 139th Pennsylvania Volunteers, where he was promoted to quartermaster and held that rank until he mustered out in 1865. When he returned, William Bradbury accepted an offer to be an equal partner in the stove foundry of Henry Anschutz. Outside his business ventures, though, William Bradbury was actively engaged in civic affairs. He was a member of the Allegheny School Board from 1883 until 1907 when Allegheny City was annexed. He was a candidate for mayor of Allegheny City in 1895, suffering a surprising loss in the Republican primary to Charles Geyer in 1896. In 1902, he served as Allegheny City's chairman of the recently formed Citizen Party, which is an offshoot of the Republican Party. He was also commander of the Colonel B. Clark Post 162 of the Grand Army of the Republic and a member of the Board of Trustees that shepherded the creation of Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall in Oakland. In 1896, he was appointed by Pennsylvania Governor Daniel Hastings to the Board of Trustees of the Polk State School in Venango County. In 1924, as I said, Bradbury died in his apartment building, which was constructed 2 decades before. The Historic Review Commission also felt that this property was significant and it's an exemplification of an architectural type, style, or design. The Bradbury apartment building is a fine example of Renaissance revival adapted to the specific program of early 20th century apartment building. In Pittsburgh, examples of this style include classroom block and first addition to the Larimer School, the Belmar School in Homewood, the built housing Fire Station 18, and the Zone 4 Police Station on Northumberland Street in Squirrel Hill, and the Osterling designed Iroquois apartments on Forbes Avenue in Oakland. The commission also felt this property was significant in its identification as the work of an architect-designer. The architect for the Bradbury apartments was Frederick Osterling. He was born in the Monongahela River community of Amity, which is known today as Dravosburg. His parents were Philip Osterling, a Civil War veteran and carpenter who came to Western Pennsylvania at 11. His mother's family was from Butler County. Shortly after his birth, the family moved to Birmingham on what is today Pittsburgh's South Side, before moving to Allegheny in 1868. There they lived in Manchester at the northwest corner of Juniata and Manhattan Streets, while Father Philip Osterling worked as a partner at Osterling Langheim Planing Mill on Anderson Street. Frederick Osterling attended the local public school before enrolling at the Lessing Institute, a private technical school in Allegheny. He received his first major commission in 1887 when he was selected to design the new Allegheny High School on Sherman Street. He was 19, I believe, at the time. In the early 1900s, Osterling served as county architect for Allegheny County. In 1915, Henry Clay Frick who hired Osterling 25 years before to redesign the Clayton family home on Penn Avenue, hired again to design the Union Arcade, later known as the Union Trust Building. Criterion 5. The Historic Review Commission also felt that this property represented an exemplification of important planning and urban design techniques. The Bradbury apartment building is significant as an early example of an apartment house, a building type that was slow to be accepted in Allegheny and Pittsburgh, but would come to dominate much of the urban landscape. A review of Pittsburgh historic newspapers for the decade preceding construction of the Bradbury suggests that Pittsburgh and Allegheny were behind other cities in adapting to this new housing type, and this caused much consternation among the editors of the Pittsburgh Dispatch, who gave the topic coverage. In 1890, articles titled "No Flats in Pittsburgh and the Probable Reason Why." The editor posits that simple ignorance was the root cause, stating the advantages of a flat, its coziness and convenience, especially for a small family, are not understood here. They conclude that suggesting that near the parks in Allegheny would be a favorable site for such dwellings. Later that year, Dispatch reported on a visit to Pittsburgh by a Chicago real estate investor, stating that nothing about Pittsburgh surprised him more than the entire absence of anything like the system of flats or apartment houses, which is such a marked feature of Chicago and New York. This time, the editors conclude that the explanation is a very simple one. It is a conservatism of Pittsburgh which makes it decline to adopt new ideas, especially in real estate and building, until they have become old ones in other cities. So as with the previous nomination, the Historic Review Commission and Planning Commission voted to provide City Council a positive recommendation. And if you see the permit for a big building, and some photographs and some maps.
Helpful to know that some things don't change, including local neighborly opposition to tall buildings being built, especially apartment buildings. So.
Yep. We're the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Shall we move on to the next one? Would that be the city county building or the county courthouse? Let's see.
I think, wasn't it the city county building?
The county building is
Okay.
next.
This one we'll try and go through pretty quickly because we're sitting in it. We can go take a field trip if you like. But the city county building at 414 Grant Street occupies an entire city block. The building is of masonry and steel construction. It possesses a modified tripartite design typical of tall office buildings in the early 20th centuries, featuring a distinct base, truncated shaft, and capital. Each elevation is clad in polished granite, with flamed granite being used predominantly at street level. The city county offices were cramped in the Smithfield Street City Hall building up until 1872. County offices were scattered throughout numerous buildings near the Allegheny County Courthouse. Following the annexation of Allegheny City and additions of over 130,000 new citizens to the city in 1907, the situation turned dire. By the time formal action was taken in 1912, plans for a new seat of government had evolved substantially. The new office building became a joint venture between the city and county. It was determined that the architect for the new building would be selected through a competition, offering $1,000 to 5 men residing and doing business in Allegheny County. And I actually made a specific note to read this out, but a particular clause was, all material used in this building should be purchased wherever possible from manufacturers who produce in the vicinity of Pittsburgh or whose main offices are in Allegheny County, and all labor employed in these contracts and on actual construction be obtained or taken from Allegheny County wherever possible. So, good team. Yeah. One thing that is of note is that this contracting process ended up getting challenged in court, so there was a several-year delay in actually getting started on the project. I believe what it seems is that there was a joint venture formed to do the construction, and that was kind of a new thing, so people didn't really get that. Mm-hmm. But one of the interesting things, one of the things of note is that at the time, the city of Pittsburgh really lacked a gathering space for folks because Market Square still had buildings in the middle of it at the time. So they bulldozed this site and left it open. And so there were gatherings on this site. There was suffragette gatherings on the site. And it's of note, particularly noted, is that the portico out front is a great public gathering space that we're very, very lucky to have because most places don't have those. It's nice to have, city steps where the kids can come and learn about government and put the Christmas tree up and the menorah and all that stuff. Yeah, so let's see. What I can tell you is that as they were working on this building, the press would do stories on how the construction was coming along, and it says as the interior approached completion, the building's modern amenities, parentheses, bathrooms in particular, were lauded by the press. The fact that a building was completed, it was under budget. The original projected cost was $3 million, and it came in at $2,875,000, give or take, was pretty noteworthy. And on April 1st, 1917, the law department were the first ones to move into the building. So the Historic Review Commission felt the building was significant for quite a few reasons. Criteria 3 is exemplification of an architectural type. So the city-county building is an exceptional example of Beaux-Arts, but it is distinctly an American extrapolation. Henry Hornbostel, who was the architect, designed the city-county building, several other Pittsburgh buildings, kept the principles of the Beaux-Arts central to his designs, but frequently departed from these precepts, integrating elements more akin to industrial-inspired brutalism, which I think is appropriate for our city. What is particularly appropriate and innovative about the executed design for the city-county building is the inclusion of 5-story tall recess through 3 monumental portals. This loggia created a civic space for the city, as I mentioned earlier. For a century, it served as a forum for civic events, public gathering place where Pittsburgh's heritage may be honored through permanent installations. The Historic Review Commission felt this building was significant as an identification of an architect or designer. The city-county building is among the best-known existing works of prominent Pittsburgh architect Henry Hornbostel, with significant contributions from internationally renowned tile artist, Raphael Gustavino, and prominent Pittsburgh sculptor Charles Keck. It's one of the few to remain largely intact, unaltered, and functioning in its original capacity as a civic space. Hornbostel came to Pittsburgh in 1904 to design the campus of Carnegie Tech, now Carnegie Mellon. He founded the Department of Architecture there, and as his career progressed, Hornbostel chose Pittsburgh as his base for independent practice, but he also resided and worked in New York. Few of his representative works in Pittsburgh include the Rodef Shalom Temple, Soldiers and Sailors, National Military Museum and Memorial, numerous buildings on Carnegie Tech campus, Thaw Hall, New York Public Library, the Williamsburg Bridge in New York. Let's see. The Historic Review Commission felt this property was significant in its association with important cultural and social aspects of the history of the city of Pittsburgh. No sooner was the building completed than it would rise to serve the country's war effort by hosting a recruitment Marine enlistment drive. The construction of this city-county building took place during the period when Europe was engulfed in what would later be known as this World War I, during which America pursued policy of distancing itself from direct involvement. The distance, however, did not prevent those in Pittsburgh from worrying about the growing conflagration as indicated on the city-county building postcard. The city-county building would host and nurture nascent traditions and continue to be an integral part of the city's social life. In 1919, the city's Bureau of Recreation placed a scoreboard to announce the play-by-play Game 3 of the World Series. Now, the Department of Parks and Rec use the city-county building's loggia to host countless recreational activities such as marble tournaments and city pong. Okay. The Historic Review Commission also felt this was significant in its exemplification of a pattern of neighborhood development. The construction of the city-county building covers the span of nearly a century when major government and civil services offices migrated from primary and secondary locations to Grant Street. A sign of progress and development, older buildings that once served the important government and civil service centers were demolished and replaced by businesses and cultural education institutions, which would become integral part of Pittsburgh's urban fabric. Allegheny City's old City Hall was demolished in 1939 to make way for Buell Planetarium, and Institute of Popular Science building in Old City Hall was demolished in 1953. Finally, the commission felt this property was significant in its unique location and distinctive physical appearance. The city-county building's distinct physical appearance creates one of the most recognizable visual features within the city of Pittsburgh, and its unofficial downtown historic Civic District, roughly bounded by Fifth Avenue, Crosstown Boulevard, Boulevard of the Allies, and Cherry Way. And at the end, we have some photographs of the outside of the building. Yeah, so that's what I have for that one.
So much history has taken place within and outside on the portico of the building. It's really
It
incredible.
really has. It really has.
Okay, so on to bill number 31, the Pennsylvania National Bank.
Okay. Well, this property was submitted, the nomination for this property was submitted in August of 2019. Pennsylvania National Bank building is a one-story terracotta building in the Beaux-Arts style. The overall form of the building is that of a truncated triangle. Its narrow primary facade faces directly at the intersection of Penn, Butler, and 34th Street, with its two sides fronting Butler and Penn Street. A wrought iron fence, embedded in a limestone base, extends from Butler Street and Penn Avenue facades of the building to form a triangular courtyard immediately in front of the building's main entrance. The building's low-pitched hipped roof is not visible from the street due to the presence of low crenellated parapet walls that surround it. On the primary facade of this parapet, the wall bears the Pennsylvania Keystone symbol on a circular plaque surmounted by an ornamental arch. The building that immediately predated the construction of this building was a 3-story tall building that hosted the Lawrence Savings Bank until 1893, when it was purchased by Pennsylvania National Bank. The architect for the new bank was chosen by competition and because of the change in design approach by the bank, entrance plans were returned after initial submissions and new plans were solicited. The winner of the competition was a local firm by the Beezer brothers, who were mostly noted for their house and church constructions in Altoona, Johnstown, and Greensburg. Locally, they were notable designers for St. John the Baptist Church, which is known as the Church Brewworks today. The Pennsylvania National Bank hired the contracting firm of Calhoun and Miller to construct the building. George Calhoun and John Miller were Lawrenceville residents who built several small houses, stables, and garages throughout the city, with particularly high concentrations in Lawrenceville, Highland Park, and Friendship. The first president of the Pennsylvania National Bank was Colonel Algernon Sidney Mountain Morgan, born in 1831 in Morganza, a large farm near Canonsburg owned by his family since 1796. In 1863, Morgan was appointed as the storekeeper of the Ordnance Department of the Allegheny Arsenal in Lawrenceville, where he served for 30 years until he retired. The bank's first president who succeeded Morgan after his death was Joseph Sidney Seaman, who was born in Harmony, Butler County in 1839. He moved to Pittsburgh in 1847 and began work in the steel industry with Samuel Leonard and later with the Pittsburgh Foundry Company. The Historic Review Commission felt that this property was significant as its identification with a person or persons significantly contributed to Pittsburgh history. Colonel A.S.M. Morgan and Joseph Sidney Seaman co-founded the Philadelphia Philosophical Society with other prominent figures included. Excuse me, let me back up here. Colonel A.S.M. Morgan had a grandfather that co-founded the American Philosophical Society with other prominent figures including Benjamin Franklin, as well as the College of Philadelphia Medical School, today the School of Medicine of the University of Pennsylvania. George Morgan inherited a large plot of land near Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, upon his brother's death and named the area Morganza. There he invited former President Aaron Burr into his 1806 conspiracy plot to overthrow the government, which Morgan declined and sent word warning to President Thomas Jefferson, was one of the 140 witnesses. Okay, Joseph Sidney Seaman, who was also president, moved to Pittsburgh at the age of 17 in 1847, where he was initially employed as a carpenter and had involvement in the steel industry when he entered into the employ of Samuel Leonard, a prominent industrialist noted for being the first American to produce angle iron. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Seaman was also involved in turning the production of artillery cannons. Seaman attempted to enlist for the war, but the recruiting officer heard of his skill in steel production, specifically related to cannons, and he was told to remain in Pittsburgh to continue his work. Seaman rose to the ranks of the foundry business to foreman and then superintendent in 1869 when he entered into partnership to operate his own foundry. The business changed names many times until it was incorporated in 1885 as the Seaman Sleeth Company. It was at Seaman's plant that George Westinghouse's railroad air brake was developed and produced, one of his first widely successful inventions. The Historic Review Commission also felt this property was significant as an exemplification of an architectural type. Pennsylvania National Bank is a superb example of the Beaux-Arts style. Features many of the characteristic design elements, including elaborate round-arched windows, engaged pilasters, and an eclectic combination of classical elements such as architraves surmounted by a crenellated parapet wall and ornate combined keystone corbels. While not quite as imposing as the monumental structures, the Pennsylvania National Bank maintains Beaux-Arts grandiosity and elaborateness on a smaller scale appropriate for primarily a residential neighborhood. The use of a Beaux-Arts in this building helps convey a sense of wealth and prosperity, which is suited to a financial institution. The Historic Review Commission felt this property was significant in its identification as a work of an architect or designer. Pennsylvania National Bank building is also significant because of its affiliation with the architectural firm Beezer Brothers. They were twins Louis and Michael Beezer of Bellefonte, PA, practiced much of their early work in central and western Pennsylvania before moving their firm to Seattle in 1907. The Historic Review Commission felt that this property was also a landmark, a visual landmark. It has a distinctive design and location at the entrance to Lawrenceville, makes it a landmark and symbol of the neighborhood. And I think that criteria, you can clearly see that in the photographs at the back of the report and on page 10 where we have the aerial view. So that's what I have for that.
Indeed, it's the gateway to Lawrenceville,
Yep.
the Lawrenceville Business District, important location. Sarah, thank you so very much for all four of those.
Sure.
In rapid fire, I appreciate the overview and the finding of fact from the Historic Review Commission. At this would be the time that we would normally move to testimony from registered speakers, but given that there are no speakers registered, we will open it up to testimony for those in the audience who would like to speak, and if you are given 1 minute. Is there anyone here today who would like to speak on any of the four properties that are nominated for Historic Review? Please feel free to come up to the podium and say your name and your neighborhood, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you. John DeSantis, 719 Brighton Road, Allegheny West. Strong support for all four of the nominations, particularly for the last two that you've heard. You couldn't ask for a better definition of a landmark than the City County building or the Pennsylvania Bank building. Literally, they mark the land. And I'm very, very pleased that both the Historic Review Commission and the Planning Commission have forwarded positive recommendations, and I certainly hope that the members of council will embrace these nominations and move forward to designate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Melissa McSwigan with Preservation Pittsburgh. Matthew Falcone, our president, regrets that he can't be here today. I appreciate hearing Sarah's overview. We also appreciate the positive recommendations by the Historic Review Commission and Planning Commission previously, and we are in full support of these four nominations. And in closing, I hope by the end of today I will have been able to be inside 3 of the 4 buildings that are listed on here. I've never been inside the courthouse, but I'm definitely going to try to walk in there today and see what I can see. So anyway, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Melissa. And I will note that we do have a letter of support from Matthew Falcone, the president of Preservation Pittsburgh, as well, to bolster what was just said by Melissa. Next speaker, please. All right, seeing no further speakers, we will move to the next step. I suspect that this legislation will go on the next council agenda for discussion. And having exhausted the business of this public hearing, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.